want to thank everybody for showing up to support this bill.
Well, good morning, Senator Avar. So we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 113, and I'll recognize, excuse me, Senator Avar, who's the prime sponsor. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And committee members, for the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avar, District 12, and I am the prime sponsor of SB 113FN. This bill clarifies basically the Public Utilities Commission review of criteria for cost effectiveness in the Joint Utilities Energy and Efficiency Plan. Last year, the legislature acted quickly to correct an order from the New Hampshire PUC, which severely restricted the New Hampshire Saves Energy efficiency programs and jeopardized many of the contractors who worked with the programs. HB 549 restored funding for the New Hampshire Saves program and provided clarity on the program administration going forward. Contained within HB 594 was a provision that required the program's planned electric savings to be at least 65% of the program's overall savings. The PUC interpreted this change to apply to the planned lifetime and annual savings of the program, not just to the planned annual savings program. And every party in the PUC docket testified in support of applying the legislative change to the annual savings. While the statute does not specify whether the annual or lifetime savings should be used, the PUC's interpretations differed from every single party on the docket and limits the New Hampshire Saving Program's effectiveness to reduce which reduces benefits to the cost of the customers and negatively impacts home builders and remodelers who perform weatherization work programs. Because of the savings from weatherization improvements last decades rather than the years, it is difficult to balance the percentage of lifetime electric savings at 65%. Weatherization is an important tool to help consumers manage their energy costs and improve the comfort of the value of their homes. Through home performances with Energy Star programs, customers receive comprehensive audits of their homes and rebates to reduce the cost of the recommended building improvements, like increasing insulation, sealing air spaces. Many of these rebates support making homes more comfortable and less drafty, which also lower the cost of bills and less energy use. So that's an important thing. And I know Massachusetts is really spending a lot of money on these programs. So you got Nancy Kerrigan is their star. And they're just promoting it as much as possible so that they can save energy costs. I'm surprised that nobody's seen them nobody's seen the Nancy Kerrigan commercials. I don't know if you have or not. Weatherization improvements result in savings for customers overall, energy usage, and the New Hampshire Saves programs are the only source of state support for consumers to increase the efficiency of their homes. The vast majority of the cities and the towns across the state utilize HPWES programs. The PUC interpretation of the legislation changed last year puts the state's support for weatherization at risk, which diminishes the value of the programs to customers and again jeopardizes the same contractors that were intended to be protected by the usage of HB 549. The provisions added to H 549 in the PUC's interpretations change how the program has been administered in the past. Adding the simple word annual to the savings requirement would restore these popular programs and enable the contractors to continue to meet customers' expectations. The weatherization program offered through the New Hampshire Saves the New Hampshire Saves supports good-paying local construction jobs and helps electric consumers control their overall energy spending. We know how important that is today. In particular, important in the face of the current high inflation and elevated energy prices. And without these weatherization programs, customers would pay even higher energy bills. And those that can't afford to pay their bills would need to seek additional state and local assistance anyway. So this will help, this strain on New Hampshire low-income energy assistance programs, putting pressure on the state and local budgets and results in increased number of unpaid bills, which will be borne by the electric companies. So it's a good program. It's one word, and I'm asking you to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for being such a champion of helping out low-income folks. And you mentioned 549 from last year and our response to the PUC interpretation of this program. And would it be fair to say that last year with 549, it was just a rare case that we had absolute support of the governor for these programs, support of the House and the Senate in asserting that it is the legislative body which sets policy regarding this program?
I would agree with you.
And if I may, you know, I think that this change here will be very helpful and essentially reconfirm our policy commitment to the program. But would it also be fair to say that, you know, we're all aware of the recent statement made by the PUC, its so-called investigation of this program, that it is important through this bill to remind the PUC that it is the legislative body that sets policy on energy savings program?
I agree with you 100%.
I thought you might. Thank you.
And thank you for co-sponsoring this bill. It's a great bipartisan bill.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll call up Don Crease from the Office of Consumer Advocate, and he is speaking in support.
Good morning, Chairman Avar, honorable members of the Senate. As you know, I'm Donald Crease, the state's consumer advocate, whose job, along with my staff, is to advance the interests of our state's residential utility customers. On behalf of residential customers, I thank Chairman Avar for introducing Senate Bill 113. I thank the distinguished and bipartisan list of co-sponsors, and I urge swift and favorable action on this legislation. The past 2 years have been tumultuous ones for ratepayer-funded energy efficiency in New Hampshire, beginning with the PUC's order of November 12, 2021, rejecting the proposed triennial energy efficiency plan, ridiculing the cost-benefit test adopted by the same agency just 2 years prior, and declaring an intention to phase out ratepayer-funded energy efficiency altogether. But nothing I have seen, heard, or learned in the last 26 months has altered my firmly held view that the single most valuable thing I can deliver, that our utilities can deliver, or the general court can deliver to residential utility customers is ratepayer-funded energy efficiency. The reason for that is really simple, and I have said it before. Negawatts with an N are cheaper than megawatts with an M. Not, I concede, out to infinity, but certainly as far as the eye can see, given how far behind our neighboring states New Hampshire is on energy efficiency, consistent with Senator Avar's opening peroration. Accordingly, I was an early and enthusiastic supporter of last year's House Bill 549, which Governor Sununu signed into law 11 months ago. I had the honor of working with Senator Waters and Chairman Vose of House ST&E on language that would reflect the consensus view that the NH Saves programs deserved to be enshrined in statute as long as program budgets were subject to some reasonable constraints. One aspect of that was the idea that when we spend money collected from electric customers on energy efficiency, most of the resulting savings, 65% to be exact, should come from using less electricity. But in my respectful opinion, the PUC earlier this year misinterpreted this provision from House Bill 549 to apply not just to annual savings, but to lifetime savings as well. If that is allowed to stand, it would be a disaster for residential customers, and that's all of us in particular. And I'm talking about residential electric customers. Here's why. It would likely mean the drastic curtailment, if not the outright elimination, of home weatherization from the NH Saves programs. The reason for that is actually fairly simple to understand. Most Granite Staters heat their homes with something other than electricity. And weatherization measures, thankfully, last a really long time. Typically, they have 30-year lifetimes, which means Home weatherization cannot meet that 65% test if applied to lifetime savings. The 65% limitation, when applied to annual savings alone, reasonably accommodates two competing policy perspectives. One perspective is that we shouldn't use electric customer money to reduce sales of other fuels. The other says that we are all electric customers, and all we really care about as customers is reducing our energy bills overall. We've recently seen, yet again, that the PUC is straining against the reasoned and reasonable policy choices the General Court made last year in House Bill 549. But in the meantime, please adopt this surgical fix to what you did last year so as to clarify existing law and get residential energy efficiency programs back on track. And by the way, I noticed that the bill is an FN bill, but I can't think of any reason why this bill needs a fiscal note. If it will have any fiscal impact, it will be positive. That's all I have to say. Of course, I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Crease, any questions? Seeing none. Well done.
Thank
you. Josh Elliott with the department wishes to speak, and the department definitely takes a neutral stand, and we totally understand that. So, welcome.
Good morning, Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Shelley, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs with the New Hampshire Department of Energy. Mr. Chairman, as you pointed out, the department is neutral. I think the consumer advocate did an excellent job of laying out some of the mechanics of what the impact of this bill by adding the word annual into that sentence will do, which was pretty much the bulk of my testimony. So again, just the Public Utilities Commission has interpreted this between both lifetime savings and annual savings versus this a clear policy direction from the legislature to just consider it as annual. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Waters with the question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Josh. So, I mean, would it be fair to say that one of the reasons that we created the Department of Energy was to clarify, where policy took place and developed in the Department of Energy and in the legislature?
Yes, both to help at the state level as well as to be a resource for legislators in considering different policy and bringing that expertise places like here.
And would it also be fair to say that if the PUC chooses to stray into certain policy areas, that it's the responsibility of the legislature to assert its prerogative over policy by clarifying statute, as in this case?
So as a former legislative staffer, I'm probably a little biased, but yes, I've always viewed it as the duty of the legislature to set policy. As a state agency, I know I've always had the opinion of, the legislature tells us to jump, we ask how high.
Oh, I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah.
Put that into the permanent journal, please.
Yeah.
Josh said
within regular constraints of federal statute and things like that if there's a program requirements. But I will say, just in terms of other weatherization programs that are out there, certainly our Weatherization Assistance Program, or WAP, which is funded through the Federal Department of Energy, which is then subcontracted out to local community action agencies, provide funding for low-income residential homeowners in doing, and including renters, for weatherization services. And a lot of times those projects, we have a cap that's set by federal. It's $8,009. Why the $9, I'm not sure, but I think it's indexed for some sort of inflationary measure. But in almost every single one of those projects, HEA money, which is utility ratepayer money, is used to sort of finish off those projects. So they have a basically you're sort of putting you're sort of putting together the funding puzzle. They're certainly an important partner with the weatherization program. So just thought I'd add that in.
I really appreciate that. It's worth the $9. Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
So we have nobody in opposed. If you wish to speak, Matt Mayberry, are you in the room? Seems like everybody loves this bill.
That's why I'm going to take 90 seconds, Mr. Chairman
wonderful.
and Senators. Good morning. I'm Matt Mayberry. I'm the Executive Vice President of the New Hampshire Home Builders. We're very much in favor of this legislation, as the Chairman just stated. It's home builders and renovators that from 2019 to 2021 helped 5,860 families, including poor and low income, heat their homes here in New Hampshire. It's done through energy efficiency programs such as the one you have before you. The challenge to heat our homes hit every corner of New Hampshire, and these energy efficiency programs help the very poorest amongst us. Chairman Avard, in the municipalities within your district, 344 families received help. Vice Chairman Pearl, for you is 164. Senator Birdsell, 697 families were helped through energy efficiency programs between 2019 and 2021. Senator Waters, you had 246, and for Senator Altschiller was 268 families, many of which were poor and lower income, all helped through energy efficiency programs and renovations. Home builders out there every day helping those in need. Growing up, myself, it was a builder and a contractor that came and installed new windows and put insulation in my parents' home. This allowed my mom to take the blankets off the windows and put them back on the beds. It makes a difference. This program works. I'm testament that that program works. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.
Well done. Questions from the committee? Senator Pearl.
Actually, thank you for coming in. What was the number again of the folks in my district?
164.
164.
Ma'am,
Excuse me, mine?
was 697.
And that was 2019 to 2021?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And Senator Birdsell gets the door prize.
She does. Actually, it's in your district, Senator, yours was the highest in the entire state.
Good job. Good job. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you. Thank you, Senators.
We have Mark Lemery from Eversource in support, wishing to speak. Mark? Yeah, Mark, how do I say your last name again? Le Manager. That's what I was going to say?
It was right there.
That was right. I'll remember it next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Michael Licata, representing Eversource. Mark LeManager, who's our senior analyst for energy efficiency, is joining me. Just want to start off by thanking the committee for the opportunity to testify. Thank you to the chairman for sponsoring the bill and all the bill sponsors, including Senator Waters, Senator Birdsell. Actually, you're all sponsors. Thank you all. We'll be very brief because we don't want to be repetitive, but certainly Eversource is in support of this legislation. It's a very simple bill that will ensure that utilities that administer the statewide energy efficiency programs known as New Hampshire Saves can continue to support the homes and businesses with efficiency programs that helps them weatherize their homes, reduce their costs, and increase their comfort. The addition of the word annual, as previously testified, is consistent with what we believe was the intent of the legislature when it passed House Bill 549 last session. This small technical fix will again ensure that customers who rely on these programs can get the assistance they need to reduce their costs, especially during a time of high heating and electricity prices. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions you may have. Mark is here from a technical perspective, but we know you're short on time and have lots of folks who wish to testify as well.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for speaking up. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, well done.
Thank
Efficiency is what we do here. Okay, so, yeah, it's the zeitgeist. Bill Noel? Welcome, Bill. I think you're the last speaker. No, I apologize. I got one more.
Good morning, I'm Bill Noel. I'm actually representing the contractors who actually do the work. I'm in Loudon, New Hampshire, right at the end of 393. Senator Pearl has visited my facility. We were glad to have him there. I have 25 people that work for me doing this work. We're probably going to be up to 30 at the end of the year. The reason I'm here today is we actually signed HB 549 at my office, and we thought we were smooth sailing and ready to go. And then we have this. So the point I just want to get across is this is an extremely popular program. We do, really what we do is we take old housing stock in New Hampshire that is not energy efficient, and we make it energy efficient. If you boil down the program, that's really what this is all about. It's by being fuel neutral, it allows us to do a lot of work. If you go back 10 years when I get into this program, we went in and changed light bulbs, we looked at refrigerators, we then switched to CFL bulbs. Let's go now. In all our houses, manufacturers took care of this problem. We put in LEDs. I don't even know if you can buy a non-Energy Star appliance anymore, right? So we do need the latitude to go into a fuel neutral situation, do air sealing, do insulation, and make the house more efficient. If we just relied strictly on electric, it would shut the program for residential down. We just couldn't, there isn't much you can do anymore. So we just want to be sure that the program is stable and that we can continue to do this work. And I'm not speaking just for myself, but I've heard from every single contractor in the weatherization world in New Hampshire. And there's maybe 5 or 6 of us who are fairly, the main guys. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I would appreciate passage of this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Seeing no questions? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kristen Koch from BIA in support, not wishing to speak. And our last speaker is Chris Skaglin? Skoglin. Chris, how you doing? How do you say your last name? The chairman is not wishing to speak. Great. The quicker we get through this, the quicker we can.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Avard. I'm Chris Skoglund. We'll just limit it to correcting the spelling and how to say my name. And then based on all of the testimony that's been given, I'm the Director of Energy Transition with Clean Energy New Hampshire. We are in full support of this. It provides much needed certainty to contractors, but also to the program administrators who have spent a considerable amount of time over the past several years trying to make sense of PUC rulings. This will provide clarity so that they can get on with developing a plan that they'll file in July of 2023 and will hopefully be passed in December or approved in December of this year. I have testimony that goes into more detail, and we'll end it there and take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Seeing no further questions, we're going to close the hearing. Can we exec this real quick? Just real quick. Yep.
I move exec.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Is there a motion?
Move on to pass.
Second?
Discussion? All in favor of passing?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Is there a motion to move out of exec? So done. I'll take it as my bill, yeah. Thanks. All right. Can't. It's all right. So which, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for doing the exec.
Same.
No. I slipped out a Holiday Inn last night. I recognize Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 123FN, relative to the adoption of ambient groundwater quality standards by DES. And here we are one more time, back to PFAS and other issues that are all too familiar for people of New Hampshire. This bill makes some important technical corrections to existing language in statute, which has led to some ambiguity as to how New Hampshire conforms with federal statute while still having some flexibility to set ambient groundwater standards. The difficulty here, if you look on on line 10 to 11, shall be no less stringent than, and here's the issue, because that seems to conflict with how we respond to what the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act says. So right now, current law states that the ambient groundwater quality standards shall be equivalent to any state maximum contaminant level, MCL, but also states that shall be at least as stringent, as I pointed out in 10 and 11. Complying with both these criteria is not possible if the state MCL is less stringent than federal health advisory, which is a realistic possibility, given the ways that the federal government is now moving on those standards. So this bill will address that inconsistency, make us ready for being able to reconcile the federal and state standards. And most particularly, it provides clarity to the Commissioner of DES, who needs to have some flexibility in setting these standards, and this language will let that happen. I know we have folks from DES here to go into the ins and outs, but in a nutshell, that's the kind of technical correction this bill provides.
Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, so we'll hear from the department. Mr. Wimsatt? That's another one we could possibly do. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Senators. My name is Bob Scott. I'm Commissioner for the Department of Environmental Services. With me is Mike Wimsatt, the Director of the Waste Management Division. First, I'd like to thank the sponsors. This is a bill that the department requested. As Senator Waters mentioned, right now there's some inconsistencies in the law, and we'd really like to get this clarified. I'd love to once talk without PFAS being in a sentence, but currently this is about PFAS, but it's also beyond PFAS. So as science progresses, there will be other things happening. So to give you a little bit more fine detail, this law would require, if the federal government, EPA, issues what's called a health risk advisory, then our ambient groundwater standards would need to match that. So what does that mean? So the current round of, right now EPA has issued interim health risk advisories for PFAS, some PFAS compounds in the parts per quadrillion, which you can't even technology can't even measure. So in that context, even EPA will tell you that when they do a health risk advisory, it is not intended to be an enforceable standard. It's part of their process to finally get to a drinking water standard. And it's really based on zero risk. And as you are all aware, if we took a zero risk approach, we would not even get out of bed in the morning. Or actually, that would be dangerous too, I suppose. So it's just not practical. And it's not, the health risk advisories are not meant in this capacity that this law would potentially envision. So it also to put a final point on, again, for PFAS in this case, should we take this to fruition, that would mean any discharge into the groundwater would have to be to meet that parts per quadrillion standard, which likely two things. That would mean the drinking water standards that we have, or EPA is contemplating, would be 3 orders of magnitude higher. So it's safe to drink at 3 orders of magnitude higher, but it's not okay to discharge at 3 orders of magnitude low, until you're 3 orders of magnitude lower. That would inject hundreds of millions of dollars of cost for, in my opinion, really no benefit. So that's the unintended consequence of some of this language. I do want to assure everybody, and I think you're all aware, especially on PFAS, we have adopted some of the most stringent drinking water standards in the country, or the world, actually. So this is not a case of, perhaps some will say, oh, we don't want to regulate. This is not what this is. We just want to regulate rationally. So with that, I have the brains of the outfit here. I always like to surround myself with people smarter than me. It's easy for me to do that. I have Mike Wimsatt. He worked with the Attorney General's office to help craft this language, and we're happy to answer any questions. Or Mike, if you need to elaborate because I get something wrong, let me know.
No, I think I covered it.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, you're the last speaker on this bill. Anybody else want to take this up? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing. Is there a motion? Is there all in favor of exec?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move out to pass. Oh, go ahead. I'll move out to pass.
Second.
All right, you guys need to get your act together.
We did. We sorted it out.
All in favor of ought to pass?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, thank you very much. Senator Waters will take this one out. And is there a motion to get out of exec?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? And we'll hear from the next prime sponsor. Oh, wait, are we doing? That clock isn't right, though.
It's 9:31.
All right, next prime sponsor, which is SB 160, OHRV.
That's me.
That's you.
Yeah.
The seat of heat awaits you.
The seat of heat. Ay, ay, ay. How we doing, Nick? Good. Do you need this? So something's wrong with these clocks that they keep getting backed up. You have the floor, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the ENR committee, for the record, my name is Senator Howard Pearl, representing District 17. I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 160 relative to the use of OHRVs on designated trails and requiring a permit to operate certain OHRVs before sunrise until after sunset. I'm introducing this on behalf of the Fish and Game Commission to accomplish two things. Prohibit the use of OHRVs that are registered as street vehicles from being used on recreational trails in our state, except those registered as ag utility vehicles. The intent is to curb the practice of registering an OHRV as a street vehicle in another state, but then register for recreational riding on New Hampshire OHRV trails. Second thing this bill does is expand the allowable exceptions to OHRV restrictions when a special event permit is issued. Current language allows an exception to registration for OHRVs and snowmobiles that are participating in an event under a special permit. The added language would make additional exceptions for the duration of the event only. This change would promote more opportunities for special events that are desired by the OHRV community, drawing in more participants, which helps bolster a more robust economy. If you have any technical questions, Captain Eastman, who is the director of the OHRV program for Fish and Game, is here, and he will answer them. So I thank you for your consideration on this legislation.
Thank you, Senator, for your testimony. You're the man. Good job. Well done. There we go. Thank you. Anybody, any questions from the committee? Well done. Thank you. All right. Susan Smith? Doesn't say whether you're in support or not.
Well, I'm actually not for or against it. For the record, my name is Suzanne Smith, and I am the chair of the Commission to Study the Use of OHRVs in New Hampshire. And on behalf of the committee, I would say we have not had a chance to review this legislation. But in reading through it, and the reason I wanted to comment is that the OHRV Commission is a 5-year commission that was voted into law during the last session. And over the past few years on the Resources Committee where I used to serve, one of our biggest problems and challenges was balancing the exponential growth of the use of OHRVs in New Hampshire, and the use of the riders versus the abutters has been a big challenge. And one of the reasons that I put this bill for the commission in last year was to try to come to some kind of happy medium. I don't know if there'll ever be a happy medium, but something that could benefit both parties. And Part 3 of the bill directly affects that. It will definitely affect and cause hubbub among the abutters versus the people who want to ride. And so I just believe the bill is a little premature, but I'm not taking a stand on it. The first part of the bill, I believe Captain Eastman will explain, and I think that's really a good thing to do. But the other part I feel is a little premature, and the commission will be looking at this bill and studying it at our February meeting, and we'll see where we come out with it on that note.
Thank you for your testimony and for your service. With regards to the abutters, how could this possibly have a negative effect?
Well, when I am thinking immediately of people who live on ponds or near ponds and lakes where there is ice riding now, and that if this passes, that could definitely turn into organized races. And then and the higher decibel number that would be permissible and the crowds could be a problem. If that doesn't happen, great. But just, I'm more concerned with the ice riding than snowmobiles out on snowmobile trails.
Interesting. Senator Waters with a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Representative Smith, for coming here. It's these bills usually have been coming to transportation, and so
Yeah.
we've had a lot of conversation over many years now about these issues. And last year we had the bill about the ice racing on the pond in Concord, which we hashed around. And would it be fair to say that because of all the bills we've had in the past, that it really made sense to establish the commission? Because these are very complicated issues. That's kind of where we're at.
Yes, that was why the commission was formed. We had a group of stakeholders 2 years ago that met, and actually Councilor Kenny is the one who suggested we have a long-term commission to really dig at the statutes, see where they conflict with each other, see where the rules conflict with the statutes, and try to get to some kind of balance. Yep. And the commission the idea was developed from that meeting.
So if I may follow up, Mr. Chairman. So I guess my question comes down to the process of the commission in light of this bill. I mean, I co-sponsored because I think there's some things here to make some sense. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we can't speculate, but, given your schedule, that it seems to me that if we think there's some value of this bill, we could pass it and it'll get over to the House at a schedule convenient for then the commission to fully weigh in.
Correct.
Would that be the case?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
My thoughts. Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank
and
you.
again for your service.
Good to be here again.
Rich Parsons.
Good morning, Chairman Avar and members of the committee. I'm here, my name is Rich Parsons, and I'm here today on behalf of the New Hampshire Off-Highway Vehicle Association. I represent 25 clubs throughout the state, and we do support the bill. When we saw this bill after I know Fish and Game had made these recommended changes, and we think that they're beneficial changes. The first part of the bill fixes, I know it was briefly mentioned too, but it fixes what's called the Montana plate issue. Basically what has happened is people have been able to register their UTVs in Montana using an LLC, and they transfer it over to the LLC. And the way that it's defined, it defines it as a quadricycle, which is a type of motorcycle, which make it street legal in every state. So you can, if you have this Montana license plate, doesn't matter which state you're in, you can ride it legally on the roads. And so what this would basically say is if it's road legal, unless it meets our specific statutes, which require it to either be a special commercial plate, a trail bike, or other types of vehicles that are permitted to be on the road and dual registered, it would not let them register to be used on our trails in the state. So they can ride legally on the roads, I guess, but you can't ride on our trail system if you have that kind of Montana plate, or if any other state attempts to do something similar. So we think that's a good change. The second part, I'm sure the department will speak to it more, but I believe it's just trying to give them flexibility. They still have to approve any event permit, and I think part of it is targeted at events in Jericho State Park. I'll let the department obviously speak to that, and we trust the department that they're not going to approve any event, hopefully, that are going to impact abutters. Abutters are very important. Private landowners are very important. We hope that they would be very cautious with permitting anything that would impact abutters. And we have faith in them that they would do the right thing when approving or not approving a permit.
Good. Yep. Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Abby?
Thank you. My name is Abby Ivanko, and I'm from Gorham, which is unfortunately still the epicenter of ATV problems in the state. I support the first two sections of the bill. I think they close loopholes, important loopholes. Section 3 is troubling. I agree with Suzanne Smith that this should go to the OHRV Study Commission to look at any impacts. It talks about the operation of OHRVs on public ways. That is very concerning. And I live, the trail to Jericho is a mile from my house, and I hear all the machines, even though they're under 96. And so this is 96 is harmful to human health, animal health. So over 96, sound travels. I've been hiking in Randolph, miles away, and I can hear the ATVs. So I think this should really be studied carefully. Impacts on humans, wildlife.
Thank you for your testimony, Abby. Questions from the committee?
Thanks for coming down.
Thank you for your time.
And our final speaker would be Captain Mike Eastman. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. As you said, I'm Captain Michael Eastman, New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. I oversee the OHRV program as far as enforcement, registration, and safety. As Rich Parsons said before, the forward portion of this bill is really to close the loophole on our end. The Montana plate is an issue for the OHRV community due to the fact that as it takes away our power to regulate where OHRVs are operated and would create problems such as Mrs. Abakoff just attested to. So really the Montana plate is a Department of Motor Vehicle issue and its operation on a roadway. But what I heard from the OHRV community and the complaints that I received is that this plate is being used not only as to drive around town, but also circumventing having a trailer and trailering it to a legal trailhead. So they could dual register, and this would take away that ability to do that. Outside of our current special commercial plate, which is for light industrial or agricultural, we still want to allow those folks to be able to do that because we can regulate that within our state. So this would really, if they want to register for the road, that's fine. Like I said, that's a Department of Motor Vehicle fight to handle. But from our end, we really want to take that issue away and not put a black eye on the OHRV community. The second part of this bill is about the event permits. Just to explain a little bit, what happens is by law, if any OHRV or snowmobile wants to have an event, and this is generally for unregistered OHRVs at this point, they would come to Fish and Game, apply for that. There's a review process that's established in administrative rules that speaks to the town has to approve this, the law enforcement of the town, wherever it's occurring, the county has to approve that. And then once they have done all that process, it then comes to me for approval. And I mean, they have to have bathroom facilities, things of that nature. So there's definitely a review process that goes along with it. So in this process, over the last couple of years, I've had the OHRV community come to me and speak to me about, for instance, this would apply for the hill climbs at Gunstock during Bike Week every year. They would need to have an event permit. Any type of, I've had some folks come to me and ask for instance, like the Warren fireworks. They want to be able to operate after hours into the town to watch the fireworks display. So, and they would be able to do that through this permit. As far as abutters and things of that would be the approval of the town. Certainly, it says within the rules that if there's an issue, a conservation officer or a police officer could go and pull that permit if there were issues within that. So this is really expanding beyond and trying to promote OHRV and within certain communities. So that's the heart of this bill, the reasoning behind why we're looking to make these changes, and I thank you for supporting it.
Thank you for your testimony, Captain. Are you working with the commission directly?
With the Fish and Game Commission?
Yeah, with the commission that was just cited.
I am. I sit on there as well, yes.
Okay.
And we've discussed this. I did not have the heart of the bill until the last minute, so in our last meeting, we're not able to go over this, but certainly I am a part of that.
Senator Pearl with a question.
Thank you, Captain, for coming down and testifying, and appreciate your support on the bill. You're obviously aware of the concerns. We've received several emails with concerns about noise and, a night operation with some of these folks. And you're very aware of the situation, I assume, of what these folks are having concerns about.
Most certainly.
So you would take that into consideration before you ever signed off on any special event permit?
I certainly do. And this is something where if the town has an issue with this or worried about the abutters, and I think that's really, it's the community at large that would say no to this if they had abutters to wherever this was going to occur. I will say maybe 8 out of 10 times this is a very contained, the hill climbs at Gunstock, it's all contained within Gunstock, so allowed exhaust for 4 hours in an afternoon. I think for what the community gains from that, I think that's certainly a small price to pay.
Okay. So you feel that the proper review process and the proper parameters are in place then, so that we're not putting forward something that's going to be a real menace to communities?
I actually have if you'd like, I have the administrative rule that goes over what the event permit looks like. And within this, like I said, they have to have bathroom facilities, they have to have approval, they have to submit it within 45 days. They cannot submit it in less than 45 days for my approval. So and within this rule, if there's other things that need to be added to it, we certainly can do that as well if this looks like it could get out of control. In the near 4 years that I've been there, I haven't seen that occur, and there's a review process. For instance, there was actually an event that occurred at Big Island Pond in the southern part of the state. I think it's Dairy, and that was one where the person who asked for the event permit had said that he had all the approvals of the town, and come to find out when the police department called and said, "Why are you letting this happen?" He did not, and we pulled that permit, and the event did not occur. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. No further questions. We're going to close the hearing because I have nobody else to speak on it, and I'll entertain a motion.
Exec.
Is there all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Is there a motion on the bill?
I'll move on to pass.
Second.
Discussion. One of the things I think Senator Waters and we both agree that we pass it and let the commission look at it, and if there needs to be amendments in the House, they can address some of those concerns, and that way at least you have a bird in the hand and you've got something to work with. So all that being said, all in favor of it being passed?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none?
Mr. Chairman, do you want to revote before all this? So we
We can't. Senator Burns is not here.
Oh, she's gone too.
Yeah. We're in the same spot.
We're good. We're good. Okay.
Senator Pearl will take it out. Is there a motion to move out of exec? Any, all in favor of moving out of exec? Aye. Aye. Okay. I recognize Senator Waters. Oh, yeah. You have the floor, Senator, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 164 relative to biodiverse environments. And just to let the other committee members know that I may be called not long after my introductory testimony over to Senate Education. I've got a couple prime bills, but I'll do my best to get through what I have to get through here and to stay as much of the hearing as I can. This bill, as you can see, does a variety of things. It presents some findings about biodiversity. It looks at the way biodiversity might be incorporated into existing conservation and land preservation statutes and activities taken by the state. And then it offers individuals enabling legislation if they want to do certain things to take care of their animals or to establish conservation principles for their own private property, that they can do that as well. I thought I'd provide just a moment of context for this. Biodiversity is a concept that has come to be the foremost way of thinking about our ecology and our environment and its preservation. It recognizes, as you will see on page 2 in a definition, biodiversity means all the species, including plants, bacteria, animals, and humans, in a particular region, habitat, or ecosystem that works together to maintain balance and support life, variability of all these things, all the different types of it. What's interesting about this movement is that it looks much more complexly at what it is that creates a biodiverse environment. And interestingly, it also includes humans here as a component of biodiverse environment. So it doesn't imagine a kind of a wilderness or some area set off, in part recognizing that there really is, it's hard to find any place on Earth that has not been impacted by human development, by plastics, by air pollution, or whatever. Humans are everywhere, so we're part of this biodiverse environment as well. This movement, this legislation, comes out of that international and national scientific recognition of this framework for thinking about where our planet is at. I was a delegate to the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity in December up in Montreal, 189 nations and a couple thousand people working on a broad convention there to treat issues of biodiversity. I think the one thing people may have heard about this international national movement is the so-called 30 by 30 movement to preserve 30% of our land and marine areas for biodiversity by 2030. And that's the international goal. And executive order from President Biden means the United States has adopted that goal too, and it's being implemented across the nation through the Department of Interiors and other departments as well. Why take this approach? This is why on page 1 we have the findings. The 69% decline in global populations of animals, fish, birds, and reptiles since 1970. So that's in numbers. 3 billion birds. I think it's here, they've got 3 trillion, let's say 3 billion, excuse me, in North America since 1970, and 1,000 animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction. What makes this current to New Hampshire, as we heard from Senator Guida's bill last session, but also recognized in our marine waters, is the impact of invasive species, and also warming temperatures. As your legislative commissioner on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, we are confronting very dramatic changes in the Gulf of Maine because of perhaps the fastest warming body of water on the planet, up about 5 degrees. In the last several decades, we've lost northern shrimp. We are seeing, through warming and acidification, migration of lobster populations further offshore, effects on cod and other finfish mortality, plus the arrival of things like green crabs and southern species of fish as well. So a lot is changing out there. And then in part 3 here, the land-based environment, 66% of the ocean environment significantly altered. Think plastic, think acidification, think warming, and also the other impacts on land. And so principle 4 is that people of the state of New Hampshire, including future generations, deserve a clean, healthy, and biodiverse environment. I will note that across the country there are states that are enacting legislation here. One state, Pennsylvania, has adopted a constitutional amendment to this effect, and there is a constitutional amendment was adopted a couple of years ago in Maine, which addresses some of these issues as well, and we're likely to see more of this done around the country, around the world. Several nations, India, Colombia, Peru, Switzerland, the EU is moving in this direction to recognize the right to a clean and healthy environment for all beings there. So a biodiverse environment benefits New Hampshire citizens. So the state of New Hampshire recognized the need to maintain biodiversity and enhance the capacity to adapt and change to the need, provide for the needs of future generations. And this is kind of the heart of the rest of the bill, to say if this is what we need to do to protect our environment now, but also for future generations, then we need to recognize biodiversity in our state statute. Now, there's some question about the source of those statistics, so without, I wasn't going to, I'm an English professor, I love footnotes, but I wasn't going to do it in a bill. But let me note the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or called IBIS, is the source of, accepted scientific source of international information on biodiversity. Its report from last year summarized 15,000 science and government sources and was adopted as a report that provided the best possible science on the losses that are outlined in those findings. Also, we have the recent study by the Audubon, the State of the Birds report issued last fall, which gives that 3 billion number in the past 50 years, and half of the United States birds are in decline. Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology is also a source of that. As far as the numbers here on animals, this is from not only the IBIS report, but the World Wildlife Federation report of October 12th, 2022, which has a 69% drop on average of wildlife population since 1970. And our very own Department of Environmental Services report, which we studied in this committee last year because of Senator Guida's bill, recognizes the impacts of invasives here. So what the bill then tries to do, and let me just say, a pause for a moment to say that if you want to understand the biodiversity of New Hampshire's land groups and state agencies, then all you have to do is introduce a bill like this, and the Hornets Nest, a very biodiverse Hornets Nest, will appear. And I recognize that, and I understand I've had a lot of conversations about problems the bill presents. So I understand that, acknowledge it, and we'll see. Sometimes that's just the way things are. So what the bill tries to do, starting on the bottom of page 1, sub 2 there and 3, is to include biodiversity in various places. So here we insert right to a clean, healthy, and biodiverse environment into land use controls. We also note here including innovative land use controls, village plan, subdivision, parcel of land, include biodiversity there, as you see in bold on page 2. And then down on the bottom of page 2, if a municipality wishes to pass charters, so enabling them that if they want to pass a charter protecting the rights of residents to a clean, healthy, and biodiverse environment, including pure water, clean air, natural beauty, healthy ecosystem, stable climate, they can do that if they want to do it. Then conservation restriction, bottom of page 2, adding biodiversity. I think there's, I've had some discussion with Matt Leahy and others about saying, well, we take conservation very seriously, and they do. And it's one of the extraordinary things in the state of what all the nonprofits have done to, land trusts and others to preserve land, Fish and Game Department and others to preserve the land through conservation measures. But I think that biodiversity is a much broader framework than conservation. Conservation's intent, focus, philosophy is different from biodiversity, and if biodiversity is becoming the way that we're beginning to look at things, so that's why I've suggested adding to conservation biodiversity here as a possible use on bottom of page 2, top of page 3. Similarly, with discretionary easements, provide an opportunity for folks who are creating these easements to use the biodiversity framework, essentially giving landowners and others the opportunity, enabling, if they wish, to include this rubric as well. Bottom of page 3, you've just seen biodiversity in bold introduced here. And then in the Community Heritage Investment Program, introducing biodiversity here. We did some similar things with wildlife corridors and habitat strongholds through that program before. I understand that LCHIP is anxious about tampering this language, and fair enough. If that is something they don't want to do, then I don't think we should do it. In terms of whacking the hornet's nest, let us turn now to page 4. When I have some conversation about animal guardianship. And let me note first that this is enabling legislation that would permit someone who wants to do this for their companion animals to provide legal representation for their companion animal. It does not require that. It enables it. It is an interest increasingly that people with companion animals are trying to understand, and I think philosophically too. I've mentioned the states and the nations around the world that have established animal rights to personhood in some form or another in their constitutions. I do not think that New Hampshire is ready to establish personhood for animals. That's why it's not in this bill. But I think that an individual owner of a companion animal ought to have the right to do what they want to do to afford these legal protections. Now, I know, Mr. Chairman, and I just can't quite remember chapter and verse, that the Bible does say their foot shall slide in due time. So, slippery slope. And I understand that a lot of people are concerned that this potential legal protection could disrupt the ways in which animals are raised and the ways in which a lot of things are done, because there is these basic fundamental notion a lot of people still have that animals are property and that are covered by property rights. I will say that there's a lot of legal and philosophical conversation now. I could recommend the newest book, Martha Nussbaum's Justice for Animals, which goes back really to Aristotle through all of Western tradition, through the Bible, to argue that in fact, animals should be seen as ends in themselves, not as a means to ends of human beings, and so that they perhaps can be afforded some legal rights that we usually associate with people. I will notice here as well that we already do this kind of thing. We have essentially guardianship for children, for folks who are not able to represent themselves legal in court. We already do that for folks who cannot represent themselves, and so this statute here is essentially doing the same thing. It's a kind of a form of guardianship which individuals could take as they wish. And you see the forms there about legal transfer of rights and so on, bottoms of page 4 and 5, and you'll see the proposed legal language that would do that. Similarly, as bottom of page 5 and on to page 6, that if one wished to do so for their own purposes, then for their land, then they could select through a memorandum of understanding and legal documents, an organization that could oversee their property from the perspective of biodiversity and have the legal authority to represent those interests. I put some names in here of possible things. I did not mean to say, I think that, were there to be interest in this bill, certainly this could be amended to take out the names of designated organizations and just say whoever the landowner finds that's willing to do this, fine. They could create their legal document. Now, I think it's very important here on lines 25, 26 on page 6 to address concerns that have been raised about wildlife management. Obviously, you do not own the wildlife that's on your property. That is in state statute. There are wildlife management practices of Fish and Game and others in the state that recognize that wildlife are common property in a way. They don't stick around in one place or another. So that's why on line 25 it says nothing in this statute shall contravene the rights of the state of New Hampshire. I think that addresses any concerns that people might have that these memoranda of understandings and legal rights that a private property owner wants to establish would impinge upon wildlife or other aspects that are controlled by the state. And then at the end here, suggest that the department, in terms of departmental planning, that biodiversity be included as part of that planning a wildlife action plan. But they are too noting that nothing in that planning would contravene existing state statute on the authority of the department to manage wildlife. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to go on for so long, but I thought that given the fact that this may be for many people a relatively new concept, and one that has national support through law, executive order, and international support, that is something that New Hampshire probably ought to pay attention to and allow our individuals and future generations to have some claim to a clean, healthy environment, and to allow private individuals to make some choices they might wish to make. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And just as far as the green crabs, we know they are definitely an invasive species, but I saw in the Hampshire Chronicle that they're becoming a delicacy. So that's
I've eaten them. I've had them. Mr. Chairman, if you excuse me, I got to grab my phone to make sure I haven't got a text.
You do have a text. Does that mean you got to go?
No, I'm good.
All right.
Still good.
And with regard to, in the Bible, thou shalt not muzzle the ox of the mouth of the ox who is treading out the corn, because he has a right to eat it. And also there is another verse, and I think it's in chapter 9 of Genesis, where it talks about God will give an account.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, it's an interesting question, because we do know that in Genesis, the account of the creation is that God finds good not just the creation of humans, but also finds good the creation of other animals. And throughout the Old Testament, there are cases in which that creation, especially after Noah's flood, and through the covenant is not made not just with animals, with humans, but also with the rest of creation. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how biodiversity, and you can find it, through Aristotle and classical times, and I would think perhaps in the New Testament as well, a commitment to the Creator seeing not just humans as having sovereignty. But let's note too that if you look at the actual Hebrew for that word of sovereignty, that it suggests mutuality. Mm-hmm. of the creation. So we can have a lot of talk about that, but their foot shall slide in due time, and I know I'm on slippery slope with this bill, Mr. Chairman.
We're all good. It's good for conversation, and Senator Pearl has a question.
Well, thank you, Senator Waters. I appreciate that our long conversation yesterday afternoon. You took heart to it, because you brought up several references that we had in our conversation about concerns that I raised, and I appreciate it. See, it was good to know you were listening. I thank you. And a couple of questions I have. Did you consult with any of the agencies, Fish and Game, Department of Ag, Transportation, or anything before you crafted this bill?
I have had some conversations. I think that, this was one that came out on the very last day from OLS. And so as soon as I had it, I sent it to everybody, but that's the way it was at that point in time. So the consultation has been occurring since the bill came out.
Thank you. Well, I'll just thank you. I'll put on record, as you know, I have grave concerns, especially about the animal guardianship portion of this. I know, and I appreciate you recognizing the slippery slope that we talked about we're going down, and I very much would say that strikes a huge amount of concern with me, coming with my background in animal agriculture, and I know if you are able to stay, you're probably going to hear a lot of testimony against that particular portion of the bill. And so I thank you for your testimony, and I'm fine with having the conversation. It's always good to do that. I've learned a few things in listening, so thank you.
And I thank you, Senator, and I appreciate so much your advice and concerns, and understood. And Mr. Chairman, I just got a text, so I will come back if there are more questions from the committee, and I'll try to be back before the other testimony is over. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Senator. I'm Matt Leahy. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests. And I was going to thank Senator Waters for raising the issue of biodiversity. It is something Land Trust have been actually working on and dealing with for quite some time. This is from the Land Trust Alliance, which is the national umbrella group for land trusts like the Forest Society. And it talks about protecting biodiversity. This was back in 2016. So, this is an issue that we're concerned about and that we're involved with. But, we have been looking at the bill. It's, as you can see, very comprehensive, very extensive. It makes a number of changes to existing statutes. But I think probably our bottom line issue is that we don't know if this bill is necessary right now, quite frankly. And it's not that we see necessarily harm, but it's, for example, it talks a lot about conservation easements, and an easement, as you know, is a legal agreement between a private landowner and either a land trust, or it could be a state agency or a local municipality, that limits development on that particular land with the goal of protecting, the forest resources, water resources, and to be honest, biodiversity on the land. So, we're always very cautious when when there is a bill like this that makes, like I said, pretty substantial changes in a number of different statutes, RSAs in New Hampshire. So I'm not trying to avoid saying whether we support it or not, but I think that the land trust in New Hampshire would say, we are working on biodiversity right now when we protect habitat, when we do a conservation project. I would say, if there is, gaps in whether it's state programs or otherwise that may, could help better promote the, promotion of biodiversity, we'd sort of be interested in that. But, I think, like I said, right now, we just don't know if it's really necessary to make all these changes that are in the bill as proposed. So I would just leave it at that. But I'm happy to take any questions, though.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Excuse me, Senator, sorry. There's one thing I do, and I have talked to Senator Waters about this, but in the new section 14, Roman numeral 2, number 1, it actually names the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forest as, I guess, a guardian of the animals. That is not our expertise at all. And, and again, I don't know what would the outcome, but if this bill were to move forward, we would certainly ask at the very least that any reference to the Forest Society be removed from the bill, because that's really not our expertise, and we certainly don't have the capacity to do something like that. But again, just the bottom line, we just don't know if this bill is necessary right now. So, but thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Nancy?
Hang on a second. I will stand up. It does happen.
Welcome back.
It's education freedom account. It says 20 more kids.
Oh. So Forest Society said it's not their expertise.
That's good. That's good.
Welcome.
Well, finally made it to the seat. Okay. Good morning. My name's Nancy Holmes. I'm from New Boston, New Hampshire. I'm an animal owner, a landowner, a person who cares about wildlife, wildlands, and New Hampshire. As such, I am in opposition to the passing of SB 164 as it's currently written. I've included some section of bills in the write-up that hopefully you'll have copies of, but I'm not going to read those to you, I promise. They're just there because I needed reference points for what I was saying. As I read this bill, my understanding of the intent was it was to encourage landowners, including developers, to grant the state conservation easements on their land or a portion of it to help preserve open space and biodiversity. That's a worthy goal. One thing you must remember, though, is biodiversity is not static. It moves. Those green crabs are now part of our biodiversity. Where the bill entirely fails in its intent is where the concepts are included for animal guardianship, landowner responsibility for all elements of biodiversity on the land, including wildlife, and the right of entities to sue the landowner or assume land or animal ownership if they believe there's any violation occurring in the landowner's new responsibilities. Let's see if I can read my own scribbles. There was an assertion that the concept of animal personhood and animal rights is a mainstream issue. I would say more of a fringe issue, albeit the people pushing for it have quite a good funding base to do so. I don't believe it's as mainstream as it might have been presented to be. If a person really wants to set up something like that for their animals, they can have their lawyer write it up for them. We don't need it in law. Okay. Where this becomes particularly dangerous for landowners, this bill, is under 477-47-A, preservation agreement, where those statements are added that declare that the animals, including wild animals on the property, belong to and are the responsibility of the landowner, but are their own legal entities, and the landowner is their guardian. This is a huge change in our laws, and it appears that if I granted that sort of proposed conservation easement on my land, I and any future owners would become an owner guardian of all the animals and their descendants on the grantee's property and the biodiversity necessary to sustain them. That's a tall order for a state, let alone an individual landowner. My understanding is that wild animals are currently the concern and responsibility of the state of New Hampshire, not the landowner, and that there are already specific rules for how a landowner may interact with this wildlife. This would change that. And how would this sort of change impact landowners during natural occurrences such as drought, flood, invasive species? We heard about green cabs. I was looking at the emerald ash borer that's killing all the ash trees. Oil or toxic chemical spills, wildfire, or anything else out of the individual landowner's control that would impact the landowner's environment severely. On my land, I have frogs, toads, and salamanders. I have a vernal pond, where these typically complete their life cycle in the metamorphosis into land creatures from the eggs laid in the spring, before the pond dries up for the summer. In our recent drought years, there's not been enough time for that process to complete before the pond is gone. If I granted the proposed conservation easements on my land, would I then become responsible to maintain that pond to ensure survival of the amphibians? Would I have to preserve the mosquitoes too? Currently, I use a product that's a bacteria that kills mosquito larvae. I can't believe that the majority of landowners, their lawyers, or future land buyers would be interested in an easement where the landowner would assume the outlined onerous responsibilities and then could face lawsuits or potential loss of their land or animals for failing to meet impossible conditions for retaining ownership. Would you purchase land with such an easement on it? Would you want your city or town to purchase such land and take on those responsibilities? I believe passing this bill would actually reduce the number of landowners willing to grant conservation easements on their land, potentially reducing the open space in the future because of it. I ask you to vote SB 164 inexpedient to legislate. And if you couldn't understand me, please ask a question.
Totally understood you. Thank you very much for your testimony. And I would highly recommend dragonflies. They eat the mosquitoes. They got
Yeah,
nice larvae.
they aren't happy in the tiny little vernal pond. But I've got a thing called mosquito dunk, which is, I can't remember if it's a bacteria or something else that impacts only mosquito larvae. And like dogs can eat the little mosquito dunk and everything can drink the waters, no problems. So yeah, I agree. I love the dragonflies, but they aren't working hard enough on my property.
Yeah. I really appreciate your testimony.
Yeah.
Questions from the, Senator Waters.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. I think you pointed out some real important issues, and I recognize that. And you know, as I said, it's a learning experience. And I just wanted to note on your notions about the changing species, and that in the definition of biodiversity on lines 19 to 21, it does say as well as changes in abundance and distribution over time and space within and among species, biological communities, and ecosystems. So, I mean, I wrote it that way to include the fact that when something comes in and it's new to it, well, now it's part of the biodiversity. So you see what I'm getting at with that one?
Yes, I do. And my problem is when I've heard people discussing biodiversity, which I have about this bill, they seem to think biodiversity means this is always here, and this is always here, and this is always here. And that's not what biodiversity is about. It's that we have a multiple number of species in the same space interacting.
Yeah, and thank you. And I agree with you completely. And the other thing I hope you notice too is that what's different about this too is that, some people think of, wilderness and keeping people off and so on, but this definition of biodiversity includes humans, that humans are part of nature too, and they're interacting, they're cutting trees, they're doing, all the things that they're creating pollution, all the things that we do. And so doesn't it make sense to include humans in biodiversity?
Oh, absolutely, because the number of people who think that humans aren't animals just appalls me.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, I mean, I just paid an outrageous amount of money to take out some really dangerous trees that were going to be on my house, and I cut them out just after the windstorm when they were all leaning on me, and just before the snowstorm when they would have been on me. But the other thing I thought about in terms of what your responsibility would be on the land is I love wildlife. I love watching it. I don't want it in my house, and that includes carpenter ants, termites, spiders, the things the cats bring in. I like it outdoors, and I wouldn't want to lose the ability to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
Everything has a song. I don't like spiders and snakes.
Well, I actually like spiders and snakes, just outdoors.
I don't either.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
And let me just ask one more question. And,
Sure.
Thank you. So, I do think there's a conflict in the draft. In one place that recognizes it's not wild animals, another place that mistakenly says that. So that's for sure. But my question to you is that, as somebody who loves the environment and someone who loves animals, that if an individual wants to take on this kind of legal agreement, should we say they can't?
I think if an individual wants to work with their lawyer to set up an agreement for their personally owned animals, that they should have every right to do so, and they do that now. Okay. How many people do we read about that leave their estate to their animals? The thing that bothers me with what's written in the bill is that part about some outside entity deciding that you aren't doing it up to snuff and being able to take the animals in the land. I also was not happy with the idea that I would be responsible for that darn bear. Because I don't want to be responsible of, I enjoy having the wildlife on my land. I enjoy watching them. I don't mind if they come by and, eat the garden much. But I just don't want to be responsible for the fact that when the bear's done looking at my house for flipping over every flower pot to see if there's a bug underneath, that he goes over and takes down the neighbor's bird feeder. I'm just, not willing to be responsible for that.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Nancy. And so, Dan, in opposition with NHFG? Oh, look at all these people. Thank you. Dan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to testify before you today. So I'm Dan Berger, and I'm the Chief of the Wildlife Division with the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. I'm here representing the department and the commission in opposition of SB 164. So I'd like to start by saying that the department is certainly supportive of the intent of this bill. I think it's a lofty goal to aim to conserve and maintain biodiversity. And as a matter of fact, as the guardians of the state's fish and wildlife and marine resources, the department's mission is to work with the public to conserve, manage, protect these resources and their habitats, inform and educate the public about these resources, and provide the public with opportunities to use and appreciate these resources. Much of the work that the department does is aimed at conserving diverse wildlife populations and diverse wildlife habitat throughout the state. However, we do have some concerns about this bill and how it may impact our ability to manage and conserve both wildlife and habitats in the future if it were to pass. So the department considers biodiversity as part of our broader conservation measures. And while it's certainly protecting biodiversity as a purpose or a justification for these broader measures is a laudable thing to do, it can become difficult in practice when there's legal requirements that are set for something that's as broad as biodiversity. Again, looking at the definition of biodiversity, it encompasses all the species of plants, bacteria, animals, and humans, as well as the variability among living organisms, their ecosystems, and that includes variation in genetics, phenotype, phylogeny, functional attributes. And again, it is a good definition of biodiversity, but it is very broad and it makes things difficult in practice. We foresee this making things complicated to justify whether a landowner's actions are supporting maintaining biodiversity, particularly if they were challenged. So some questions would be, who determines which aspects of biodiversity take precedent over others? How is the maintenance of biodiversity measured? Those are all things that I think would be very difficult given how much is incorporated in biodiversity. This could be very challenging for landowners to determine how practices such as agriculture, forestry, and recreation might have to be modified on their properties to maintain this broad suite of variables that are outlined in the definition. And we think this could result in confusion, conflicts of opinion, and possible litigation. But one of our bigger concerns is the language pertaining to the rights due to wild animals living on a given property, and that animals and their descendants are a unique form of property. And again, the intent of this is certainly admirable, but creating a legal precedent that enumerates rights to wild animals or classifies them as a form of property is certainly contrary to the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is a set of principles that's guided wildlife management for decades. And it's considered one of the greatest conservation success stories in our nation. And core to this is that wildlife are held in the public trust. And as such, they're the responsibility and the duty of state and federal fish and wildlife agencies to manage those for the public. As a result of that, management decisions are science-based and intended to have the greatest benefit to both wildlife and human populations. And biodiversity is really baked into the decisions that we make. Our concern, and this goes back and it was mentioned, is the slippery slope aspect of this. And that a law such as this could erode those principles and jeopardize our ability to effectively manage wildlife and their habitats in the future. Lastly, I'll just point out that most wildlife have home ranges that extend beyond the boundaries of a typical land ownership in the state. And landowners have little or no power to impact the practices that happen on abutting properties, and therefore no way to guarantee the well-being of wildlife that are present on their properties. And it's very difficult and can be very costly to document and determine what specific factors are working on and impacting wildlife populations. And again, because of this and because of the broad nature of what encompasses biodiversity, we have concerns that this could again lead to confusion, conflicts, and possible litigation. So I'd like to thank the committee and I will happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks so much for your thoughtful testimony. And I said before, I do think that there are, you know, the wildlife, the wild animals thing is, you know, I got messed up on that. But I think, but let me ask this more basic question. If I could direct your attention back to the findings on page 1 of the bill, which outlines the extinction rate, the species loss, the threatened status, the 69% decline in wildlife, the 3 billion birds. I don't know what percentage that would be, but I think there are some calculations. And I think it's fair to say that there's nobody who questions this science, and that the trends are very clear. So given those findings, would it be fair to raise the question that maybe what we're doing on conservation of wildlife is not working?
I think that's fair to say at a very broad scale. The problem is there's so many, it's such a complicated system that to have a legal definition and to assume that property owners would be able to meet those requirements and that there would be agreement on what constitutes maintaining biodiversity. You know, again, I feel like, again, I think it's admirable, and we do this in our management efforts. We try to address this, but we try to address it through different things like diverse habitats, diverse wildlife species. And we get at it through different bits and pieces, but to have a legal definition and requirement for people that's as broad as that, I think it's tricky to maneuver that. But I certainly don't agree. I don't disagree that you know the sources that you referenced are very valid sources. These declines are happening, but a lot of this is above and beyond, I think, what a individual landowner can address through what they're doing on their own property. Climate change, things like that, very difficult to address even given this. But I will assure you that, you know, I mean, if you go on our website and Google New Hampshire Fish and Game Biodiversity, I'm sure you'll find you know, lots of references to that. We consider it in all of our management decisions. It was a big consideration when our wildlife action plan was put together. That is going to be renewed in the next couple of years here. It will continue to be at the forefront of our thoughts when we look at all this stuff. But again, our concerns are the broadness of the definition, and then again the precedent of setting legal language that would give rights to wild animals.
May I ask a follow-up, please? So, you know, understood, and I mean, I think that the bill arises from the recognition of the kind of desperate straits that we're in, which is, again, indisputable, but also trying to deal with that complexity that you mentioned. And I guess I just would ask, are you aware of, you know, there's some big fish and game departments out in New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and are you aware of the statutes that they have passed in reference to these kinds of things, including a constitutional amendment that passed in Pennsylvania? Not specifically, no. Well, thank you. And, you know, when I said in my introduction that I think this is a new enough topic, but I'm not all by my lonesome, shall I say.
No, yeah, and I think it's great discussion, and again, I think, again, the intent is, we commend the intent, absolutely.
Thank you so much. And you're right on about some of your critiques, so I get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question.
Yep.
If I understood correctly, you have two objections. One is the whole wildlife piece in the back.
Yes.
So, setting that aside for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
stipulated that everybody agrees that it's got to be the conversation is open with this, and then we'll go from there. But backing up to page 2, I think I'm looking at this definition and some of the uses of biodiversity. I took you up on your suggestion. Where does the definition, where do you part ways?
So it's not that we disagree with what the definition is in the bill. It's if it's such a broad definition that I think it would be very difficult for I think it would be confusing and difficult for agreement amongst parties, and I think it opens the door for conflicts and litigation, because again, I'm not sure, you know, say someone signs into one of these and property transfers hands, whoever holds the easement feels that bacteria is very important. You know, this could be a property that's doing a lot for wildlife, agriculture, recreation, but there might be one aspect that sticks for them. So how do we decide, again, where the precedent, or where the, how do you parse out which parts of biodiversity are more important? So if someone feels that you're not meeting it over here, they could create an issue for that, and how do you justify all the other good things that you're doing for other parts of biodiversity? It's so broad that I feel like anyone could potentially find something you're doing that's having a negative impact on one thing, even though you may be having a lot of positive impacts for other parts of that definition. So it's the broadness of it, I think, that legally makes it very difficult and opens it up to conflicts and possible litigation.
Oh, no, I'm good, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Robert Johnson. You can play guitar, man. Welcome. You got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Rob Johnson, and I represent the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as the Federation's policy director. The bill makes fundamental changes in New Hampshire statutes. I think you're well aware, and both it's the letter and the direction of where we're going. And as has been raised earlier, we're looking at this questions, what is the purpose and the need? And we do appreciate Senator Waters' acknowledgement that the bill needs works. With all due respect, we think that the bill needs to be killed. I'm going to skip around here as I'm trying to, I don't want to repeat, but in just kind of picking up on the last question discussion relative to biodiversity, I mean, we see it as, I think was noted earlier, as it's already a key element that's intertwined in conservation. And our concerns, again, it is, as said earlier, it is very broad, and as a landowner and farmer, you look at it and you wonder. I've got to say, I haven't had a discussion with Senator Pearl yet, but as a maple producer, I'm thinking, he's wondering, boy, if my sugar bush, if I'm cropping for that and I'm weeding out other species, what does this mean? If I'm a forester, what does it mean or a landowner, what am I managing for white pine stands or an oak stand? As a farmer, what does it mean with my field if I'm growing corn or alfalfa? And at what point does it become an issue? That's when it's so broad that it's all these questions. It's almost, I've got to say, when my folks and I first looked at it, it was overwhelming. I'd say, what does this mean? We realize that the intent is good. We understand that. It's simple enough because biodiversity is important. But again, it's what's on this piece of paper and how it could be used. Again, I'm trying to speed it up here. The whole guardianship piece, is we certainly agree as far as wild animals go that fish and game needs and should be the clear and sole wildlife should be their responsibility. Period. There's there's so many interpretations. I kind of chuckled and when Senator Waters in his introduction made the comment about whacking the hornet's nest. Well, that could mean different things to different people. Is there an issue there? And I know you were just saying it, but I kind of chuckled. I thought it was in concluding here, as far as the guardianship piece in particular, all of it actually, where guardianship piece on for animals. It's I know it's couched. It could be worded as animal care, but it's not about anything about animal care. This is about control because it just transfers that right from one individual, one person to another, and I'll leave it at that and try to answer any questions if you have any.
I appreciate your testimony. It's a worthy conversation, though, as far as this whole piece of legislation. Just to even if this finds itself in a deep hole and it doesn't get passed, having a conversation about these topics, we see a need, and so maybe it's the first step at just bringing awareness, and that's about it. Or maybe there can be something that's salvaged in this. But your comments are well taken, in that. I don't see anybody in support of the bill. However, conversations have a value in themselves. So I thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Yeah, absolutely. Stacy with AKC. We love our puppies. Don't we? Well, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate having time with you this morning. My name's Stacy Ober. I am the regional manager in New England for the American Kennel Club's Government Affairs Department. And a little bit about the American Kennel Club. If you don't know much about us, we were founded in 1884, and we are a large nonprofit organization that represents more than 5,000 clubs across the country, including 13 here in New Hampshire. In 2021, those clubs hosted 150 dog sporting events that AKC licensed or sanctioned, and more than 26,000 dogs participated. So people love their dogs. They love the opportunity to get out there and strengthen the human-canine bond. AKC is recognized really as the expert in canine health, breeding, training, and responsible dog ownership. I'm here this morning because I wanted to talk about Section 11 of Senate Bill 164 with respect to the word guardian and guardianship. I think, first of all, there are two issues on which all animal lovers can agree, and that's first, that animals absolutely deserve life in a safe, caring, and healthy environment. And second, those who treat animals in a negligent or cruel manner should be held accountable. Mm-hmm. But not all animal organizations have the same protection agendas, and that's why I wanted to talk about what our department, which monitors policy proposals across the country, has seen. There are some organizations whose effort is to have animals be recognized as legal persons under the law, and I'm grateful that Senator Waters acknowledged that. I think that's probably one area where you could anticipate the greatest conflict of opinion as to whether or not that's appropriate or not. And I think from our vantage point, what we have witnessed is litigation, long enduring litigation as a result of some of these proposals that have been put forward in other states. But Section 11 of Senate Bill 164 would create a new section in law formalizing the creation of private contracts between animal owners and willing guardians who would be responsible for preserving animal rights listed in that contract. Failure of the owner to meet their obligation would result in the guardian being granted legal standing, which is a legal term, in a court of law to enforce those obligations. What we have, typically our kennel club owners might breed and have a dam from one kennel and a sire from another kennel, and it's very common for them to co-own a litter of puppies, and those private contracts are entered into all of the time. So for us, in reading this section of the bill, it really raised the question as to what was the purpose here, the intent in inserting the word guardian into New Hampshire law and formalizing that label. And so from our vantage point, we believe the section really intends to change the legal status of animals here in New Hampshire. And words matter. No one knows that better than all of you in your line of work, especially when they're placed in statute. And I'll just read for you the legal definition of guardian from Black's Law Dictionary. A guardian is a person lawfully invested with the power and charged with the duty of taking care of the person and managing the property and rights of another person, who for some peculiarity of status or defect of age, understanding, or self-control is considered incapable of administering his own affairs. And I appreciate the senator acknowledged there are legal provisions, for instance, where typically a guardian would be appointed by the court to represent the legal interests of a child or some other individual who does enjoy legal rights under the Constitution, but is incapable of speaking on their own behalf in terms of enforcing what those legal rights are. Long-standing principle for animal law has been that animals are treated as property, and that legal framework actually goes a far way in protecting animals. Well, what do I mean by that? Anywhere from animal cruelty statutes, holding owners accountable financially for the care of their animals, animals that are stolen being returned to the property owner. There is a whole framework, a legal framework based around property law that actually protects animals. And the American Kennel Club is concerned that were we to change the legal status and give animals legal rights, it could actually interfere with government's ability to enforce the animal cruelty laws, to ensure that owners are held accountable for the care of the animals they own, and also could have harmful consequences for veterinarians, for instance, that might find themselves sued for malpractice or difference of opinion when an animal owner makes a decision around a certain treatment for their animal and someone else has a different opinion about whether or not that treatment is appropriate or not. So you begin to see, I think, the Pandora's box around having someone else have decision-making authority and the potential litigation that would ensue.
Senator Waters with a question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
I assume you're finished?
I am. Yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate, Stacey, your earlier communication, and I think you and I share such a deep concern about animals, and so I really value especially your critiques and the issues that you raise. And I think you may have heard me reference Martha Nussbaum's new book, Justice for Animals, and preceding that with Cass Sunstein, she did the animal rights book back in 2008. So there's a lot of history and a lot of movement around these issues, as you know. And let me just start then with a little bit of a philosophical question, in that this notion of property, and this bill is entirely voluntary enabling. It doesn't say anybody has to do anything. It's just if you decide to, you can. But I understand the slippery slope and concerns about that. But wouldn't it be fair to say that if you look back over the last couple of hundred years, that women and enslaved people were regarded as property, and we've moved beyond that, and that now, maybe not a majority, well, probably a third of the people in the world live in countries that constitutionally recognize the rights and personhood of animals. So there is a kind of a philosophical question there about what kind of legal rights potentially are there. So is that fair? Is fair enough summary?
I think you're right. There is a growing body of literature by philosophers and others, philanthropists and others, promoting legal status for animals. I'm not aware of constitutions that have been amended. I've read a Harvard law professor who claimed that Egypt had amended their constitution. My neighbor happens to be from Egypt, and their interpretation of that language in the constitution, again, difference of opinion as to whether, in fact, it does afford legal status to animals. So I guess not everything you read, as we know, is accurate. And I've not seen other countries that have amended a constitution to provide it. But we know that, for instance, there are legal cases here in the United States that have gone forward, and the courts have uniformly rejected the notion that a person can have legal standing in a court of law on behalf of an animal. Probably the one most public profile is Vircher, Justice versus Vircher out in Oregon. Just last year, the Animal Legal Defense Fund had, again, a decision from the appellate court in Oregon knocking down the case where they were looking for not criminal charges, but a civil suit to bring a civil claim for damages that included pain and suffering on behalf of a horse that had been neglected and forfeited by the owner, and also looking for attorney's fees back to them as the entity bringing forward the legal status of a horse. And the court rejected it, but my understanding is they intend to appeal it up to the Supreme Court. Another example, for instance, of whether or not we're going in the right direction, and I share it merely in the spirit of acknowledging that reasonable minds might disagree. The Connecticut director for the Humane Society of the United States had an unfortunate tragedy in 2019 where a mixed breed rescue dog in her home attacked a elderly woman, a guest of her mother. And the bite wounds were so severe that this woman died from the bite wounds of that dog. The town of Suffield issued a disposal order after quarantining the dog and going through its process. And what I'll share with you is that the Hornishes had appealed to the Department of Agriculture to overturn the disposal order. The Department of Agriculture determined that as a matter of public safety, they didn't feel the couple would be capable of confining the dog, and that the dog was a threat, a risk, and it ought to be disposed of. The couple has gone forward. They have 2 pending lawsuits. One, they're suing the town of Suffield to pay for the care and conditions of the dog while it's being boarded, pending their appeal in Superior Court, looking to stay what they refer to as the execution of the dog. So again, these, as I said in my testimony, words matter. They have meaning. I feel as though, in looking at this word guardian, it is, again, a chipping away or a way of trying to legally make some analogy around animals with children, other individuals who enjoy legal rights under our Constitution but are incapable of pursuing them. So that's just from my vantage point.
Let me follow up. Just to note, because you raised the question, do look at India's Constitution and Colombia's in particular, because they not only ascribe personhood to animals, but also to natural features such as rivers and mountains. So that's there. Switzerland has something that could be interpreted that way. So in Pennsylvania, people are interpreting their so-called Green Amendment to the Constitution, which was passed a few years ago, as affording some of that. But let me just kind of come back to a little more particular question about the concept of animal protection. And I also know, too, I'm sorry, I'm just trying in my mind to remember the appeals court case, which did recognize a form of guardianship for primates that are being used for the purpose of research. So that is a court ruling in this country that recognized a form of guardianship, but very, for one species and so on. But I guess my question to you is that a lot of our statutes in this state and elsewhere have to do with, are about cruelty, animal cruelty, and that facet. And I guess what I'm asking is that on this concept of guardianship, it is not just for cruelty, but the kind of notion of animal flourishing, of animals having ends and sentience in themselves, which all science now, except for like cartilaginous fish, And sponges and others say that animals have what passes the test of sentience, and so have intentionality about their lives, take not just pain, as the utilitarians would have it, but pleasure in certain things. And so those are areas that simply are not covered by our cruelty statutes, but recognize the animals as entities and ends in themselves that have a kind of a self-directed purpose and some would say a right to flourish. And so do you understand that difference I'm getting at with this?
I do. I think there's a developing body of science around what we understand and know about animals, whether it's dogs or dolphins, and what their capabilities are. I will say that, and give you another example, I do believe the court system is well equipped to manage these types of issues. It was a cruelty case, but for instance, in the Michael Vick case, you all recall with the dog fighting, the court in that instance appointed what's referred to as a special master, which is a different legal label, categorization. But in essence, it was an individual who was appointed by the court to ensure that the court's orders were being followed and implemented in a timely manner, again, in the best interests of the animals. And I think our current court system is capable of addressing and providing for those interests without, at this juncture, as you say, using legal terminology that's been reserved for those for humans with their legal rights and their legal status.
Thanks again. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have things like the vivisection, where they advocate for, instead of experimenting on animals and stuff like that, they've recognized the cruelty aspect of that. And it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Jordan Peterson, and he was interviewing somebody who else has dyslexia, and she single-handedly lobbied and helped all the fast food industries to, at least when they're using bovine or animals, to treat them humanely as they're going to be used in food processing. And it's interesting. But we really appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much. Is there any other questions from the committee? Seeing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Susan Price? Price. Yeah. And with the New Hampshire Fish and Game?
Yes, I will be brief. I am Susan Price. I'm the Carroll County Fish and Game Commissioner, and I'm also chair of the Legislative Committee of the Commission. It's unfortunate that Dan left. I think we understand why Dan was promoted to Chief of the Wildlife Division the year before last. I think he did an outstanding job at presenting the department's position on the bill. When you're a Fish and Game Commissioner, you get one of these Bibles.
I got one of those on my desk. Yeah.
So it is very clear that the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department has been entrusted with the wildlife, animal welfare of the state. And while there is the line in the bill that says, well, all other statutes, is not going to usurp other statutes, it certainly is a slippery slope with respect to the guardianship. And regarding biodiversity, the senator very quickly Googled our website. I too Googled our website. As of this morning, 514 hits come back on New Hampshire Fish and Game's website regarding biodiversity. Dan mentioned the North American model of wildlife conservation. It also references biodiversity. It incorporates biodiversity. This is also a living guidance document. This is reviewed by a variety of scientific and governmental organizations periodically, and is updated. So echoing Dan's position, the Commission opposes this bill in its entirety. We feel it's unnecessary. And to answer Senator Pearl's question, no, New Hampshire Fish and Game was not consulted whatsoever on this bill. Any questions?
Thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bernice Sullivan. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for entertaining me today.
I would like to speak. Well, first of all, my name is Brittany Sullivan. I live in Wentworth. I've testified before some of you in the past on various animal bills. I'm here as a citizen today, but I also am a member of Dog Owners of the Granite State, and I'm a board member of the Irish Terrier Club of America. I would like to say that I do support the concept of biodiversity. We manage our property for our forestry plan includes wildlife management and biodiversity. That's one of the things we're managing for. So I support the concept. And in fact, if you're interested in the topic of biodiversity, I highly recommend a book. It's called Where the Wild Things Were, and it's by William Stolzenberg. And it basically deals with the concept of apex predators in a biodiverse ecology. So anyway, I'm going to keep it very brief because you guys have heard a lot of testimony today. I support having New Hampshire be as, you know, as wild as we can, as diverse, to accommodate as many species of trees, bacteria, all those things mentioned. My main objection is obviously, I'm going to talk about the guardianship. I think Stacy Ober covered that very well. I don't have anything technical to add. What I would like to say about that, however, is I spent many hours watching Sesame Street with my kids when they were growing up. And I know you could sing it. I don't sing well, but there was a little song that they always had, one of these things is not like the other. And I really question what a guardianship for animals is doing in a biodiversity bill. It seems like an odd juxtaposition of two things together. That being said, I wish Senator Waters was here, because what I would like to say to him is that I think there are many other ways to approach the concept of biodiversity, and perhaps we would be better off, rather than trying to legislate something, let's educate our public. Let's get more information out there. If this is an important topic, public service announcements, work with some of these other groups that are already involved, like the Forest Society, Fish and Game, and get more information out there to the public about why it's important, rather than, and I know your job is legislation, I get that, but do we constantly need more and more legislation to address these issues? So that's all I have.
Well said. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Any questions?
Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you for listening.
Absolutely. That's why we're here. I'm tempted to sing, but I won't. Let's see. Brian Du Bois.
Good
Welcome,
morning,
Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for letting us testify today. Brian Du Bois from Wentworth, New Hampshire. Bernie and I drove down together because we're married, save on fuel. As she said,
Thank you for saving the planet.
Yeah, save everything. So anyways, we live up in Wentworth. We own 55 acres of property, and we're surrounded by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres of forest land up there. And as Bernie said, and the other folks said, yeah, biodiversity is important, especially in New Hampshire. I mean, we pride ourselves on the forest and the mountains and all this. To have to legislate what you can and can't do, I mean, I believe Senator Waters said, well, this would be a voluntary thing, but if you signed up, you'd have to follow all these guidelines. And I'm going to go back to what Bernie said. Why is guardianship and all these things put in there about animal rights? I mean, domestic animals. It doesn't belong there. It really doesn't belong there. I believe there's enough laws here in the state on ownership of animals. I came down a few years ago, and I recognize pretty much all of you folks here when the late Representative Catherine Rogers had sponsored several bills about what you could or couldn't do with the animals. They, can't be outside for this, and you can't do that, and all this. And there's enough, I believe, on the books already without, having to do something like this. And a contract for animal guardianship. We have dogs. I mean, I'm 69 years old. I've always had a dog of one sort or another. And any of the dogs we have, they're family. They're family, and we take care of them. The other one thing that really kind of caught my attention was about the animals. I believe it was the wild animals, and saying that if someone didn't think you were doing things right, that outside agencies such as the Humane Society or these other groups can come in and tell me what I can or can't do with this property, and if they didn't like it, they could take me to Superior Court. And it's, wait a minute, it's my property. I have a forest management plan in place. I have a forester that comes through. We have all kinds of wildlife. What's some outside group gonna come in and tell me, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing, oh, you shouldn't be logging this section because, we think the trees look good there, regardless if you have a forestry plan or not. And I don't see how the domestic guardianship of animals fits in a biodiversity bill. It just makes no sense at all. Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Okay, thank you
very
everyone.
much. Angela? D.O.O.G.S. I think it has something to do with dogs.
Yes, dog owners of the Granite State. Have some brochures for you. And then there's 2 pages for each of you.
Are you here to testify how wonderful Labradoodles are?
No.
Designer dogs?
I have Dobermans,
Oh.
but so I
Welcome
like
to
the
the
shorter fur. But Angela Ferrari, I represent dog owners of the Granite State, and just for those of you who aren't aware, we are an American Kennel Club affiliated nonprofit organization, and we are comprised of specialty breed clubs, all breed clubs, dog and cat breeders, veterinarians, mushers, hunters, and livestock guardian dog owners. So we have a pretty diverse group. We do look at legislation that involves more than dogs, so we're kind of here more under the compromise of protecting the interests of New Hampshire pet owners, not just dogs, although with dogs being one of the more popular pets, we do focus on them quite a bit and have a large community. I'm going to be primarily focusing on Section 11, as you can imagine, the animal guardianship portion of the bill. You've heard some things about it. I'm not going to go into full detail of everything that was in my testimony. You have it available if you would like to read it further. I think Stacy Ober from the AKC did a great job covering some of the points that I had as well. I did want to touch on a few things. The slippery slope that the sponsor, Senator Waters, mentioned is a big one and something that's very concerning always for us when it comes to pet legislation. There's a slope, we're on it, we're trying to prevent from going further down that slope, and it gets harder every year. With regards to the term guardian, I have a quote from Attorney Gregory Dennis. He assisted in writing the American Veterinary Medical Association's response to the Guardian Initiative, and he says, "To lawyers, guardian has a considerable amount of legal significance. Ownership and guardianship are not matters of semantics. They're not interchangeable terms." And I think that's something really important for us to consider in regards to this bill, which is opening up the term guardian for pets. And that under New Hampshire law, animals are considered property, and we should keep it that way. We also heard that there's some concerns about if the laws in New Hampshire do enough to promote the lifestyles that these animals would like to live. And I would say that yes, we do. In RSA 644:8, we have our cruelty to animals section, And while it does cover cruelty to animals and ensuring that they are taken care of properly and aren't being abandoned or things like that, it does also mention health, safety, or welfare of the animal. And I think when we talk about animals and the protections that we should afford them, it really is about their welfare. It isn't about their rights. Our animals don't necessarily know what they want when they want it. Yes, they know they need to eat, drink, things like that. But they really can't be out there making decisions on where they want to live, what they want to do throughout the day. If it was up to them, they would all be running free in the woods and doing all sorts of crazy things.
And taking over the entire bed.
And that. So, we need to make sure they're comfortable, they have their own bed, but it doesn't have to be in ours.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be careful about where that line is. Welfare is very important. They do not have a right to be in the bed, should you choose that they shouldn't be.
Could you make that note for me?
I think we need to create
All right.
So going back to 644:8, there's 5 very detailed sections there with numerous subsections. We've worked on that section of the law for years, making adjustments, making sure that it covers what it should cover, that the animals are safe, and that if there are inhumane practices going on, New Hampshire has the ability to go in and put a stop to that. So when we talk about calling animals guardians and having some sort of guardian contract in place at a legislative point, it really seems unnecessary. It is that slippery slope towards personhood. As a dog breeder, I have contracts for all of my puppies, and they are their property. I'm selling them to them. I do have sections that are going to make sure that they're feeding them properly, they have water, shelter, all of the things that would already be covered in New Hampshire law for cruelty, essentially. But it does let me make sure that if I was to find out something was happening, I have my contract in addition to the law of New Hampshire to enforce. I don't think that that type of contract should be made between anybody but the person that is selling the dog and the person who's purchasing the dog. And it should be something that the purchaser of the dog gets to weigh in on, and it shouldn't be coming down from the state of New Hampshire enforcing that term guardian on them when they're trying to buy their dog. I'll just take a few more minutes. I have a whole list of unintended consequences that you can go through yourself. I do want to just mention a few things that the guardian term could have, and that would be interfering with farmers' decisions about animal husbandry practices. So this isn't just about the dog breeder, the cat breeder, the pet owner. It goes into agriculture, as you heard from the Farm Bureau themselves. But the ability to make decisions around animal husbandry practices is another slippery slope that we need to be careful of. I would like to mention that this direction really bases all animal care decisions on the preferences of a minority group of activists. And I do think Senator Waters falls into that category with some of the beliefs that he has around why dogs should or animals should be considered or not property, but have a guardian. Those group of activists, they oppose breeding, animal sports, animal-based research, animals in entertainment, and raising animals for food and fiber. And they plan to use these guardian laws to tighten restrictions on animal use and ban activities that they don't approve of. So that's very concerning when we start to see this language coming into New Hampshire law. Also mentioned earlier about the American Veterinary Medical Association and that they don't recommend the word guardian being involved. It could actually impact the vet's ability to do their job if they aren't working with the person who owns the animal as property. The way that the laws work for veterinarians to prescribe medication to someone else who's going to be administering it is because that animal is their property and if somebody else, another entity, is actually tied to that animal, it starts to break down who's the authority in making the decisions on what that animal can receive for treatment. That could actually delay the ability for animals to get the treatment that they need while reaching out to this other entity and getting them involved in all of the things that in the legal process would have to happen for those decisions to be made. Unconstitutional taking of private property. We're starting to get into that realm, especially since there's going to be a ton of conflicts between federal and state statutes, regulations, and policies. We refer to animals as property with their owners. You know, if you go through all of the legislation that has to do with animals, we would have to do a whole overhaul in order to start referring to them as having guardians. So thank you for your consideration of this bill, and I hope that you will vote it in expedient to legislate.
Thank you for your testimony, and just in fairness to Senator Waters and, you know, and your statement about him being part of a minority, I try to keep that, any kind of testimony, not to directly message somebody who's sitting on the committee.
I understand.
Yeah,
Apologies.
It's just a matter of respect, and especially seeing how he's not here. Just want to let you know that's something we don't do in this committee, but we appreciate your testimony.
Yep.
So with that, is there questions from the committee? Well done.
Thank you very much.
My final speaker, person that signed up to speak, is Thea. Welcome, Thea.
Thank you.
Did I get that right?
You did.
All right.
Yes.
I have had issues all day. Welcome.
Thank you very much for hearing my testimony. I'm Thea Lottie. I am a dog breeder in the state of New Hampshire. I'm an AKC delegate for my parent club, and I am also chairman of the rescue committee for my club and have, in fact, a rescue that I have rescued from a puppy mill. And I just want to speak to Section 11 of SB 164 and start by saying that I agree with Senator Waters that the expansion of animals, the understanding of animal sentience is now expanding to include everything from octopus to bees, which is just a little unsettling. But in any event, I think I would like to draw a white line between philosophy and legislation, and that legislation has consequences that are very different than philosophical discussion. And in this case, I think that New Hampshire has already adequate protection under its current statutes to protect animals from animal cruelty. And as many other speakers have had said here today, the untold consequences are broad and significant if you change that legal definition from ownership to guardianship. And this is not just a philosophical conversation, because a few years ago, there was an animal rights organization that brought suit against a breeder who was not, in fact, just a breeder like me. She had been designated Breeder of the Year by the American Kennel Club prior to this legislation. So that's, you cannot imagine how competitive that award is. So you have to have exemplary conditions for your dogs. You have to have every single piece of paper and care of the dogs in place. So this legislation was brought by an animal rights group stating that she had been cruel to her dogs because of the number of dogs she had in her kennel, not the conditions of the kennel, the number of dogs. And it was, the lawsuit failed ultimately. The AKC had to get involved in supporting her, but New Hampshire's protection laws held. Can you imagine if the law, if that legal term had been changed from that owner having ownership of that dog to merely guardianship, which is a legal term, and guardianship treats that as a legal entity? I would put before you that that case would have been much more complex, that the owner could well have lost. And the ramifications for the ordinary run-of-the-street person who owns a pet is if that pet has legal guardianship and that pet needs a $5,000 cancer treatment. Right now, the owner, all of us, can say, I can afford it, I can do it, or no, the dog is near the end of its life, what is the point of this? If that was changed to guardianship, the vet could say, because he would be held to that standard, he or she, I'm sorry, I must do this because this is in the best interest of the animal. The owner who can't afford it is going to take, they know that, they are going to abandon that dog to the streets. They're just going to say, look at this dog, it's sick, it's got a tumor, I can't do anything about it, sayonara. And that's the reality on the street. Whereas now the owner can make the decision to have that dog put down. The owner and the vet can say, it's not worth it now, this dog should be euthanized. And the owner can say yes. And for less than 1/10 of the cost of treating the cancer, they can give that dog a humane end. So I think that's just one example. But anyway, I thank you very much for your time.
That sounds like such a downer.
I'm sorry.
But we really appreciate your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. I don't have anybody else signed up to speak.
Thank you.
Are you Kurt? Are you Kurt? Yes. Yeah, it didn't say support, opposed, speaking or not speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's kind of important. But okay, yeah, you got it.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
Sorry,
Yeah, it's blank. Just
keep that on. I'm Kurt Ehrenberg, and I'm the State Director of the Humane Society of the United States. And happy to be here today supporting the spirit of this legislation, and certainly want to commend the sponsor, Senator Waters, who is an exemplary public servant in this state, friend of humans and animals. And I thank all the members of the committee for listening to this long testimony. I will be brief, though clearly, as Senator Waters has said himself, this is not a perfect piece of legislation. What we do see as things that we support and would love to work on with all of you in the future is the definition of biodiversity, which is in this bill, is a good thing for us to talk about, consider, make sure we understand and agree on what that is. So we support that. The notion of an animal guardian contract, which is totally voluntary. I think some of the people who've testified have obscured that fact. It's voluntary, period. So if I, as a pet owner, which I am, wanted to ensure that after my untimely demise, if that were to take place, the person who inherited that pet or took over the ownership of that pet were not fulfilling the duties as I saw fit, then I could contract with a third party. It could be a person, could be, I mean, notwithstanding that he wrote some organizations in there. Mine was one of them. We're not a party to this in any way, like the Forest Society. But to say that as a private citizen I couldn't enter into that, I think is a disservice to the animals. One thing that is in this legislation that is quite interesting, I think, is saying that it is a unique form of ownership. So to say, okay, it's an ownership situation, I think we all accept that at this point. This whole slippery slope thing, I think too much protesting going on, so to speak. There really is no movement in New Hampshire that I know of, and I'm, again, the State Director of the Humane Society of the United States, to have a personage for animals. So boogeymen are alive here. So what we're talking about is the ability of a pet owner to enter into a private contract that allows that pet to be represented after that pet has been given over to a new owner. And that would be in a private contract. We would support more discussion about that kind of thing. And the idea of municipal charters, municipalities being able to create these biodiversity zones as conservation easements are now, kind of thing, we would support that. So I do think that, you've heard a lot of opposition today, but I think that representing the animals of the state of New Hampshire, and in my perspective, I try to, sounds funny, but kind of look at it from the perspective of the animals. that are owned by people. I'm a dog owner. Again, I don't, we accept the fact that animals are owned by people. And that what we are looking for is an ability to have those owners perpetuate care for their dogs the way they see fit throughout any unforeseen circumstances. And so I again would commend Senator Waters. We are not in opposition to this. We support the spirit of it. We would welcome any invitation to work on these issues with all of you in the future. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Farrell?
I didn't know if you're going to remember my name or not. Huh?
Well, I was debating whether, because you had two hands up over there, so.
Well, that was the deal.
You're the closest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming in today, Kurt. So you said something about the animal contracts. Aren't people able already to have a contract for an animal's care, with care in the event of your untimely demise, which we're not hoping for?
Anyway.
Aren't they able to already provide, it's a piece of property, and property law allows us to dictate what goes on after our ownership has expired, in the sense of we've passed that ownership on.
So that
to
may
another
be, and it would be something that I think, it's not something that I've seen a lot of, that we're aware of a lot of, so it may be something that Senator Waters is conceiving of that may, I mean, I think it's the guardianship aspect that really is controversial. It's not, you and I could enter into a contract that you would take care of my dog. I mean, that's not an issue. I think we're talking about more of a legal entity that could go to court over abuse or some aspect of the dog's life that was not satisfactory to the agreement that was made. So that, I guess you're right, but that whole aspect of guardianship and putting it into statute would really make it much more of a thing that would be available to people on a regular basis and protect a lot of animals, frankly, it seems.
Well, I think that's probably one of the concerns. Yes, please, thank you. I think that's probably one of the concerns from many of the folks sitting behind you, that the guardianship aspect sort of leads to more toward these animals having rights and them having an ability for someone to go litigate on their behalf. And I think that gets concerning when we get into you and I have sat in many hearings together on animal cruelty, and as I reminded the committee many times in the past, that no one is ever promoting cruelty to animals. We're all looking out for the best interest. Sometimes there's just different philosophies on what that is. And so, but anyway, I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate your testimony, and thank you for taking my question.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Bertzel, did you have a question?
I have one, because Senator took my other question.
Sorry.
With regard to this bill, don't you think that the guardian piece should be a separate entity versus the biodiverse? And
I'd leave that up to experts like yourself, Senator.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who commented on this. Any other persons want to go once, going twice? We'll close the hearing. And thank you all. We are adjourned.
Did you guys do that 160?
Yes. Yeah.
You couldn't wait till I came back? So it could.
He's gone now.
I know.
There's no way of
We couldn't time it.
Yeah.
consent. Yeah, otherwise all of them would be.
I don't think there's any objection.
No.
It'll just be a quick
I know, but it's just.
Who did you put it out to?
160.
You got a problem with that?